How to become emotionally invincible. Carl Jung's silent weapon. He who looks outside dreams. He who looks inside awakens. Carl Jung once said these timeless words to remind us that true strength isn't about suppressing emotions, but mastering them. In a world that constantly tests your patience, peace, and purpose, emotional invincibility is not a luxury, it's a necessity. So as you listen today, ask yourself, how much power do you give away to your emotions, and how much do you reclaim? Share your thoughts in the comments below, because here on Spiritual Wisdom, we grow together, transforming pain into strength and awareness into peace. 1. The 90-second rule. Anger is a choice. Anger is not a flaw. It is not a failure. It is a message raw, loud, and honest. It comes from the rejected corners of your being, from the shadow you've been taught to hide. The very thing you were told makes you unlovable. Your needs, your boundaries, your voice is now rising up to be heard. Anger is not trying to ruin your peace. It's trying to teach you where it was never safe to feel. When you get triggered, when your heart pounds and your jaw tightens, it's not about the person or the comment. It's about what was never healed, what was never seen. Carl Jung once said, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves." This is not about blame. This is about revelation. Your anger reveals what still aches inside you. Every spike of emotion is an invitation. It says, look here. Look at what still needs compassion. Look at the little version of you that didn't get to speak. Look at the boundary you keep letting others cross. When you treat anger as a sacred signal instead of a shameful flaw, you start healing from within. You stop reacting blindly and start responding with intention. That's the difference between suppression and transformation. That's the heart of spiritual wisdom. True spiritual awakening isn't about becoming endlessly calm. It's about becoming endlessly aware. It's the ability to pause before you project, to listen before you lash out, to hold your pain without letting it spill onto others. Anger doesn't destroy relationships. Unconscious anger does. When you carry years of silence, when you bury your truth, it eventually explodes. But when you acknowledge your fire with tenderness, it burns clean. It becomes clarity. It becomes the truth. It becomes the force that builds boundaries, not barriers. Most people don't want to sit with their anger. They want to escape it, suppress it, pray it away. But the escape becomes another cage. You cannot bypass what your soul has assigned as your next lesson. And in this season, anger may be that lesson. Emotional maturity is not about never being triggered. It's about recognizing the trigger, owning your reaction, and asking, what is this trying to teach me? What unmet need is crying out through this emotion? When you start seeing anger as a compass, not a curse, everything shifts. You become less reactive and more reflective. You stop giving your power to external chaos and start reclaiming it through inner clarity. In that space, you're not controlled by anyone. No one's words, looks, or silence can hijack your peace. You have your emotional sovereignty back. There is nothing more powerful than a person who is no longer afraid of their own fire. A person who doesn't run from their rage, but understands it. Who doesn't justify it, but listens. Who doesn't weaponize it, but transforms it. That is the mark of someone who is awakening. That is the path of spiritual depth. Not avoidance, not perfection, but presence. The courage to feel without being consumed. the wisdom to pause, reflect, and alchemize pain into self-respect. Anger is a doorway, and if you're willing to walk through it, not slam it shut, you'll find a part of yourself you've been waiting your whole life to meet. 2. The myth of the button pusher. People have no control over their emotions. When someone offends you, it's easy to believe that they are the problem. Their words, their attitude, their energy. But the truth, as Carl Jung taught, is far more revealing. You're not triggered by them. You're triggered by what's unhealed in you. What stirs your anger or discomfort is rarely about the person in front of you. It's about the unresolved pain, the buried beliefs, the emotional wounds you haven't yet faced. Their comment or behavior is just a match. The fire was already inside. This is spiritual wisdom in its rawest form. Because once you understand that your reactions are reflections of your inner state, everything changes. You stop trying to change the world to feel safe, and you start turning inward. That tightening in your chest, the spiral of thoughts, the heat behind your eyes, it's not just about what happened in the moment. It's about the version of you that never got to speak. The moment you were dismissed as a child, the time you were hurt and told to get over it. When you're emotionally hijacked, you're not really in the present. You're reliving the past, and it's begging to be seen. Most people want control. They want to feel calm, composed, unshaken by the world. So they chase strategies, deep breaths, boundaries, mantras, fake calm. But underneath all of it, the storm still swirls. Because control without awareness is just a temporary escape. Real freedom comes from integration. You don't need to silence the trigger. You need to listen to it. That discomfort is intelligence. That reaction is a messenger. It points to where your love hasn't yet reached. This doesn't mean you tolerate poor treatment or justify others' behavior. It means you take responsibility for your emotional world. It means you begin to ask different questions, not, why are they like this? But why does this hurt me so much? That shift is where power lives. That is where transformation begins. Instead of being pulled into someone else's chaos, you observe it and realize, this isn't mine to carry. That clarity doesn't come from intellectual understanding. It comes from doing the inner work, from facing what you were taught to avoid. Spiritual wisdom teaches that every trigger is sacred. It's an invitation to heal, not to blame. Every person who frustrates you is showing you something about yourself, your expectations, your wounds, your values, your boundaries. They are mirrors, not enemies. Their presence reveals where you are still reactive, still raw, still seeking wholeness through outside validation. But the moment you stop expecting the world to protect your wounds and instead begin to tend to them yourself, you become untouchable, not cold or detached, but centered, aware, and grounded in truth. To never be bothered again is not about building emotional armor. It's about building emotional clarity. You become less reactive not because you've numbed yourself, but because you've finally seen yourself. You understand what lives beneath your anger, what your sadness is trying to say, and what your silence is begging you to hear. And when you do that, when you meet your emotions with compassion instead of resistance, no one holds power over you. Do you recognize that the trigger isn't about them, but about your own healing? If this truth resonates with you, declare it in the comments. I choose to heal what's within me. 3. The shadow holds the key to emotional freedom. Your shadow isn't your enemy. It's the gatekeeper to your emotional freedom. Carl Jung taught that everything that irritates us about others can lead us to a deeper understanding of ourselves. The things that trigger you, whether it's someone's loud voice, their emotional intensity, or their bold vulnerability, are often reflections of the very parts of yourself you were taught to suppress. You weren't born detached, guarded, or composed. You were trained to be that way. Somewhere along the line, being sensitive became a weakness. Being needy was seen as shameful. Expressing too much joy, anger, or desire was labeled too much, so you buried it. But what's buried doesn't die. It waits. It becomes part of your shadow. And when someone shows up in your life embodying the exact traits you've disowned, something inside you tightens. That tightening is the call. The anger isn't about them. It's about you, meeting the abandoned self. That's why integration, not avoidance, is the path to wholeness. You don't heal by deleting people who trigger you. You heal by asking, what in me is rising to be seen? A woman raised to be the strong one, always composed, may find herself irrationally annoyed by someone who cries openly. But her annoyance is actually her shadow saying, I once cried like that. I was shamed for it. I miss that part of me. Or a man who prides himself on being logical might judge someone deeply intuitive. But the judgment is a mirror showing him the part of his soul that once believed in feeling, but was taught to fear it. Carl Jung's spiritual wisdom isn't about becoming perfect. It's about becoming whole. And wholeness means reclaiming every part of you, even the messy, dramatic, impulsive, insecure fragments you've hidden. Triggers are sacred. They lead you to your unhealed places. Emotional freedom is not about being unbothered. It's about being deeply aware. When someone shakes your peace, they are not stealing your power. They are revealing where it was never stable to begin with. This is the invitation to stop reacting and start reflecting. Every emotional reaction is a doorway. The ones who trigger you are not villains. They are messengers. They mirror your inner work. They call you home to the self you lost while trying to be accepted. To be spiritually awake is not to float above pain, but to stand in it, breathe into it, and ask what it came to teach you. That's the shadow's gift. That's Carl Jung's timeless lesson. 4. Triggers are mirrors and teachers. The people who upset you the most are not random villains in your story. They are precise, intentional mirrors reflecting the unresolved parts of your inner world. That sting you feel when someone mocks you, ignores you, or challenges you. It isn't just about their behavior. It's a signal, a spotlight on the wound you've buried. Instead of asking, why are they like this? Which only traps you in blame, ask, what is this revealing about me? That question is the beginning of real emotional freedom. Carl Jung said, everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. That's not just a quote, it's a map. When someone disrespects you and it infuriates you, maybe it's because deep down you've struggled with self-worth. When you feel rejected and your heart tightens, maybe it's echoing an old story where you weren't chosen. The emotion isn't the enemy. It's the invitation. It's not about controlling others. It's about integrating the parts of you that still hurt. If someone says something untrue about you and it rolls off your back, it's because there's no hook inside you for that comment to cling to. But if their words cut you deep, it means there's something inside you still uncertain, still afraid it might be true. That's where the mirror becomes a teacher. That's where spiritual awakening begins, not in the silence of meditation, but in the heat of everyday emotion. When you react without reflection, you give away your power. You become a puppet to someone else's words, moods, and projections. But when you pause, when you breathe, when you ask, "What is this showing me?" you take your power back. You move from emotional slavery to emotional mastery. That's the essence of spiritual wisdom. Not to avoid emotion, but to understand it, to decode it, to alchemize it. This isn't easy work. Blame is easy. Defense is easy. But healing requires awareness. It asks you to get honest about the stories you're still carrying, the roles you're still playing, and the identities you're still clinging to for safety. And it demands you rewrite them, not to please others, but to set yourself free. Your triggers are not flaws. They are sacred clues. They point you to the places in yourself still waiting to be loved, seen, and heard. Every irritation, every judgment, every emotional spiral is a message from your soul. Not to harden you, but to soften you into truth. Because when you stop asking others to change and start doing the inner work, the world outside you begins to shift. You become less reactive, more grounded. You stop being hijacked by external chaos. You stop needing everyone to like you or agree with you. That is true liberation, not being untouched by life, but being unshaken by it. That is the spiritual awakening your soul has been craving. And it begins not with them, but with you. If this message resonated with you, leave a like, subscribe to our channel, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss another moment of self-discovery. Type in the comments, "I am ready to learn from every trigger and grow through it." 5. Emotional mastery is about integration, not suppression. Emotional mastery isn't about being unaffected. It's about being fully aware, about feeling every wave of emotion without letting it dictate who you become. You don't reach peace by ignoring your feelings or pretending they don't exist. You arrive at peace by understanding them so deeply that they no longer control you. Integration doesn't mean staying calm at all costs. It means letting every emotion rise and fall inside you while remaining anchored in your own center. That's not a weakness. That's wisdom. And it's the kind of spiritual wisdom that transforms your entire relationship with the world. When someone says something sharp, it's not their words alone that hurt. It's the memory, the wound, the story it reactivates within you. Your chest tightens, your breath shortens, your thoughts spiral, and in that moment, you have a choice. You can lash out, shut down, or distract yourself. Or you can pause and ask, "What is this emotion trying to show me about myself?" Carl Jung taught that everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. That's the invitation to stop running from your triggers and start listening to them. They're not curses, they're clues. Suppressing emotion is like holding a beach ball underwater. The more pressure you apply, the more forcefully it will erupt. But when you practice integration, you let the emotion surface, breathe, and pass. You don't identify with it. You observe it. You learn from it. You hold space for it without letting it take over. That's emotional sovereignty, not being immune to pain, but becoming so intimate with it that it can no longer blindside you. A woman once believed her strength came from being the calm one. She never cried in front of others, never got angry, always smiled. But inside, she carried years of unspoken grief and resentment. One day, after a simple conversation triggered her deeply, she didn't suppress it. She didn't perform calm. She sat with her rage, shaking, crying, breathing through it, and listened to what it was saying. It wasn't asking her to destroy anything. It was asking her to finally be honest. That moment didn't make her less peaceful. It made her real. From then on, her calm came from truth, not performance. True integration is when you stop splitting your emotions into good or bad, right or wrong. You recognize them all as parts of you messengers, not enemies. And in doing so, you stop being reactive and start being reflective. You're no longer tossed around by other people's energy because you've learned to anchor into your own. Your inner state becomes yours again, not something anyone else can steal. That's how you rise not above your emotions, but through them. Not by pretending, but by integrating. And when you live this way, spiritual wisdom stops being a concept. It becomes the way you move through life steady, present, and deeply free. If this message speaks to your soul, repeat after me. I honor every emotion, and I choose integration over suppression. I am mastering my inner world with grace. 6. Self-worth comes from within, not others. You stop being reactive the moment you stop outsourcing your identity. As long as your sense of self-worth is built on the approval, validation, or recognition of others, you remain vulnerable to every shift in their mood, tone, or opinion. Carl Jung taught that the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. And that journey begins when you no longer hand your power to others. Their words, their judgments, their silence, none of it should determine your value. When your self-worth is externally dependent, every interaction becomes a test. A raised eyebrow feels like rejection. A missed compliment feels like failure. But once you start drawing your identity from within, the game changes. You no longer live to be seen. You live to be aligned. You speak not to impress, but to express. Their approval becomes a bonus, not a requirement. And in that shift, you gain something priceless: inner freedom. Mia, a talented designer, used to live for validation. Her boss's comments shaped her mood, her confidence, her sleep. Every piece of feedback echoed louder than her own voice. But after immersing herself in healing work and Carl Jung's spiritual wisdom, she realized something profound about her boss wasn't the problem. Her dependency on external validation was. She stopped needing to be affirmed to feel worthy. She started creating from a place of self-trust, and in doing so, she reclaimed her peace. That's the power of individuation. According to Jung, it's the process of separating your authentic self from the false identities you've worn to survive identities like the people pleaser, the overachiever, or the one who's always agreeable. These masks may win praise, but they cost you your soul. When you release them, you don't become less connected. You become more whole. You don't lose compassion. You gain boundaries. Emotional sovereignty doesn't mean you don't care. It means you care without collapsing. It means you hear someone's opinion without absorbing it into your self-definition. You can love people without needing their permission to feel whole. You can accept feedback without shrinking. And you can walk away from misunderstanding without needing to explain your worth. Carl Jung also reminded us that everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. So when someone's words sting, ask yourself, what part of me still believes them? What story inside me do they confirm? Often, their voice is just an echo of a wound that hasn't been seen yet. And healing doesn't always mean fixing it, it means integrating. You carry the pain? Yes, but now with wisdom. You see your triggers not as flaws, but as invitations. The moment you stop needing others to tell you who you are, their opinions lose weight. Your energy stops leaking. Your peace becomes steady. You become a mirror of strength, not because you force it, but because you remember it. When your identity is rooted within, you don't need to defend it. You embody it. And that is spiritual wisdom in motion. 7. True power is psychological sovereignty. Carl Jung called it individuation, the sacred path of becoming whole by owning every fragment of your inner world. You don't reach power by numbing your heart or silencing your soul. You arrive at true strength when the places that once bled have been tended to with such honesty and presence that they no longer cry out. You don't flinch when someone disapproves because you've already accepted the parts of you they're pointing at. You don't chase people who leave because you no longer abandon yourself. You don't over-explain because you've made peace with being misunderstood. This is not arrogance. This is what it feels like to be internally free. This freedom doesn't mean you feel nothing. It means you're no longer ruled by everything. Anger, sadness, and pain still come and go, but they don't possess you. You don't react automatically. You don't spiral. Instead, you witness. You allow the emotion to rise and pass like a wave that no longer knocks you over, because the ocean within you is no longer chaotic. This is not cold detachment. It is warm awareness. It is spiritual wisdom in motion, the kind that says, I trust myself enough to feel everything without collapsing into anything. You become untouchable, not because you hide, but because you've healed. The judgment of others can no longer define you, because you've already looked your shadows in the eye and stayed. When someone criticizes, you pause not to internalize their words, but to ask, does this resonate with the truth I know in me? And if it doesn't, you release it. You don't carry every dart that's thrown your way. You've built inner walls made of clarity, not fear. You've stopped needing to convince anyone of your worth, because your being alone is the evidence. This kind of power cannot be faked. You can't pretend your way into sovereignty. No meditation trick, no affirmation repeated 1,000 times can replace the deep work of integration. Real peace is earned. It comes from sitting with discomfort until it no longer threatens you. It comes from witnessing your jealousy, your rage, your insecurity, not to judge or banish them, but to understand what they protect. And in that understanding, their grip loosens. That's when you realize it was never about silencing your emotions. It was about learning their language. You don't need to become harder to protect your heart. You need to become softer with yourself. Gentleness is not weakness when it's rooted in self-respect. Silence is not avoidance when it's chosen with discernment. Boundaries are not walls when they're drawn from love, not fear. Spiritual wisdom teaches us that we don't ascend by escaping life. We rise by descending into our own depths and learning how to hold ourselves through it. And so, the people who once triggered you become mirrors, not threats. Their judgments become reflections, not verdicts. Their leaving becomes redirection, not rejection. You no longer fear losing them. because you've stopped losing yourself. This is what it means to live whole. Not perfect, not unaffected, but rooted, clear, and profoundly free. If this message has stirred something deep within you, leave a comment of truth. I reclaim my power. I am whole, rooted, and free. Thank you for watching this video. Remember, true emotional invincibility doesn't mean you stop feeling. It means you learn to master your inner world with awareness, patience, and strength. If this message resonated with you, please take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who needs this reminder, and subscribe to Spiritual Wisdom. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell so you won't miss our upcoming videos that will continue to guide your journey of self-discovery and spiritual awakening. The darkest sign in a person's mind, revealed by Carl Jung. Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. Carl Jung. Every person carries a hidden side within a shadow that quietly shapes how we see the world and how we treat others. The most dangerous sign in a person's mind, Jung revealed, is not anger, pride, or fear, but projection. When we refuse to see our own darkness and instead accuse others of what lives inside us. The real journey of spiritual wisdom begins when you dare to look within, to confront what you've denied, and to turn your inner shadow into light. So, as you watch this video, ask yourself, what parts of me have I been fighting against? Comment below your thoughts, because awareness is the first step toward transformation. 1. The root of the most dangerous sign. Shadow projection. Carl Jung described shadow projection as one of the most dangerous forces within the human mind, a psychological trap that destroys clarity and self-awareness. It begins the moment we reject the traits we dislike in ourselves, our selfishness, ambition, jealousy, or even our hunger for power, and unconsciously project them onto others. The man who denies his own aggression will call others violent. The one who suppresses his ambition will accuse others of greed. In doing so, he lives under a dangerous illusion that he is pure while the world around him is corrupt. This is the blindness that leads to judgment, resentment, and the slow decay of the soul. In the realm of spirituality, this projection is not merely psychological. It is a spiritual disease that feeds on ignorance and pride, keeping a man trapped in separation from his higher self. When Jung studied the human psyche, he saw that projection was the mind's way of avoiding confrontation with its own shadow. It's easier to see evil in the faces of others than to admit its reflection in your own eyes. This is why so many people live in cycles of conflict, never realizing they are at war with themselves. Every person who irritates you, every trait you despise in someone else, is a mirror revealing what you have not yet accepted in your own being. Jung once said, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves." Yet instead of listening to that call for understanding, the unawakened man pushes it away, insisting that the problem is always out there. This resistance is the greatest obstacle to spiritual awakening. To awaken spiritually is not to become angelic, it is to become honest. It is to stand before your shadow without denial, to see that within your heart lives both the saint and the sinner, the creator and the destroyer. The journey of self-realization demands courage. The courage to look inward when the ego wants to point outward. The courage to ask, Why does this trigger me? Instead of saying, they are wrong. Every irritation becomes a lesson. Every judgment, a mirror. Every shadow, a doorway to consciousness. When a man learns to walk through these doorways, instead of shutting them, he begins to integrate his disowned parts and reclaim his wholeness. As Jung taught, integration is the path to authenticity. When you face your shadow, you release the energy trapped within repression. Your suppressed desires become creativity. Your hidden anger becomes power. Your envy transforms into inspiration. But when you refuse this process, you remain spiritually blind, inflated by false morality and fragile in the face of truth. The man who integrates his shadow becomes unshakable, humble, and real. He stops projecting darkness onto the world because he recognizes it as his own. He no longer seeks enemies outside himself because he understands that the battle was always within. This is the essence of spirituality, not escaping darkness, but transforming it into light. Spiritual awakening is the moment you realize that what you judged in others was the part of yourself still waiting for love. When you stop running from your shadow, you stop living in fear. You begin to see with spiritual clarity that there is no purity without awareness, no light without shadow, no awakening without humility. Jung's wisdom reminds us that the most dangerous sign in the human mind is not hatred or anger, it is self-deception. And the only cure is awareness, to see, to accept, and to integrate every hidden corner of the soul until nothing remains unseen. Comment below. I choose to face my shadow with courage. If you're ready to stop projecting your pain onto others and start walking the path of true spiritual awakening. Remember, real freedom begins when you dare to look within. 2. The case of Friedrich from collapse to awakening. Friedrich was a philosophy professor who spent years blaming the world for its dishonesty, convinced that everyone around him was deceitful and insincere. He came to Carl Jung filled with contempt for humanity, claiming that no one could be trusted. Yet Jung, observing him quietly, saw that Friedrich's anger was not about others at all. It was a mirror reflecting his own disowned traits. Jung helped him realize that he was the common denominator in every conflict, that what he despised most in others was what he unconsciously refused to face within himself. The moment this truth surfaced, Friedrich's carefully constructed image of moral superiority collapsed. What he mistook for failure was actually the beginning of his transformation, the shattering of illusion that forced him toward self-integration and true spiritual growth. At first, he resisted the insight with all his strength. Like most people, he could not bear the idea that the darkness he saw in others might be his own reflection. But the shadow has a way of demanding recognition. The more we deny it, the louder it knocks. As Jung taught, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. Friedrich began to see that the dishonesty he accused others of was not an external problem, but an internal one, the projection of qualities he had buried deep within himself. Every lie he pointed out in others was a truth he couldn't face in his own heart. Every act of judgment became a mirror that revealed his inner wounds. Through this painful confrontation, he came to understand that self-awareness is born not from peace, but from conflict, and that the road to authenticity always runs through the valley of humility. As his perception shifted, so did the world around him. The faces that once provoked his anger now appeared softer, more human. He began to see that reality had never been against him. It was reflecting him. Jung called this the process of individuation, the integration of shadow and self, through which a person becomes whole. In spiritual terms, it was a rebirth. Friedrich's collapse was a sacred breaking, opened the destruction of the false self that allowed his true nature to emerge. His pain, once seen as punishment, became initiation. It taught him that real spirituality isn't about escaping imperfection, but about embracing it with awareness. Through this awakening, he realized that the shadow is not evil, but misunderstood energy, the parts of us that long to be seen, accepted, and transformed. To reject them is to stay divided. To face them is to awaken. Each moment of honesty became a small resurrection, each acceptance a movement toward inner peace. He learned that spirituality isn't about light alone. It's about balancing the meeting point where light and darkness coexist in harmony. Spiritual growth begins when we stop blaming others and begin listening to the whispers of our own soul. Friedrich's journey reveals a truth that applies to every one of us. What we condemn in others often reveals what we have yet to heal in ourselves. When we project our shadow, we live in illusion. When we reclaim it, we begin to see clearly. The world becomes less an enemy and more a mirror. Transformation does not come from fighting what we fear, but from understanding it. The shadow, once embraced, becomes the doorway to light. And through that door, a new self is born, one that no longer hides behind judgment, but walks in awareness, humility, and truth. That is the essence of spiritual growth, not the denial of darkness, but its sacred integration into the wholeness of the human soul. 3. How projection works neurologically. Carl Jung revealed one of the most unsettling yet profound truths about the human mind projection: the invisible force that distorts how we see others and ourselves. Neurologically, this begins with the brain's mirror neurons, which are designed to simulate the emotions and actions of others within us. When we observe someone expressing anger, sadness, or joy, these neurons allow us to experience a trace of their emotion, as if we were living it ourselves. But when we have rejected certain traits within anger, pride, jealousy, or vulnerability, the brain interprets these mirrored emotions as external threats. It convinces us that what we are sensing belongs to the other person, not to us. In that moment, we become blind to our reflection, mistaking our own shadow for someone else's flaw. Over time, the brain encodes these rejected aspects of ourselves as psychological danger zones. Every time we encounter someone who unconsciously reflects these traits, we react defensively, not because they are harmful, but because our ego is protecting us from recognizing something we've buried. This is how projection transforms from a momentary defense into a chronic state of misjudgment and paranoia. We begin labeling people as selfish, arrogant, or manipulative, never realizing that what we hate in them may be what we once disowned in ourselves. Jung called this phenomenon the shadow, the unseen container of all we repress and deny, yet continue to carry in the depths of our psyche. As this dynamic repeats, it creates a self-reinforcing loop that keeps us trapped in illusion. We see only what confirms our biases, and our perceptions harden into conviction. The more we project, the more our outer world mirrors the inner one. Everything that irritates us about others, Jung wrote, can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. Yet few are willing to face this mirror, because doing so requires humility and the courage to admit that the darkness we perceive outside may in fact originate within. Imagine walking through life wearing a pair of tinted glasses without realizing it. Every face, every situation appears colored by that lens. Projection works the same way. It filters our reality through unhealed wounds. The friend who intimidates you might simply embody your unrealized confidence. The person who provokes your anger may mirror your suppressed power. The one you admire might represent the greatness you've yet to claim. When you finally pause and turn inward, asking, "What part of me is this showing?" the illusion begins to dissolve. That is the moment self-awareness replaces self-deception. Carl Jung, through his lifelong study of the unconscious, believed that reclaiming these rejected parts is essential for what he called individuation, the process of becoming whole. True spiritual wisdom begins when you stop projecting your inner conflicts onto others and start integrating them into consciousness. The world, then, ceases to be a battlefield of enemies and becomes a mirror of your own soul's evolution. As the great psychologist once said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." When you understand projection, you no longer fear your shadow. You learn to embrace it, to see in it not darkness, but the hidden light waiting to return home. 4. Detecting projection. The body scan method. Projection is one of the most deceptive shadows of the human mind. It disguises itself as moral clarity, yet it is born from inner blindness. Carl Jung taught that when we project, we are not truly seeing others. We are only seeing the rejected fragments of ourselves, dressed in their image. When a person accuses someone of being arrogant, selfish, or manipulative, he is often describing the very qualities buried deep within his own psyche. That is why projection feels so charged, so tense, and so self-righteous. It is the ego's desperate attempt to avoid looking inward. In the realm of spirituality and spiritual awakening, projection is the hidden chain that binds us to ignorance, keeping us from the truth of who we are beneath our defenses. Jung once helped a man named Friedrich recognize this illusion through a practice he called the body scan method. Every time Friedrich found himself judging someone, Jung instructed him to stop and turn his attention inward. "Scan your body," Jung said. "Feel where the tension lives. Is it in your chest, your stomach, your throat? Then ask yourself, could this discomfort be my disowned quality surfacing?" It was a humbling revelation. As Friedrich repeated this exercise over time, he realized that almost 9 out of 10 of his judgments were projections of his own unresolved emotions and unaccepted flaws. Each time he felt that righteous heat rise inside him, he discovered it was not the truth, it was the shadow speaking. The recognition was painful, but it also became his liberation. When you look closely, you'll notice that projection always carries a certain emotional charge. The more reactive you are, the more personal it is. The body knows before the mind admits it. The clenched jaw, the shallow breath, the tightening of the chest. These are not reactions to another person's behavior. They are signs of your own hidden wound. Jung taught that awareness of this tension is the first step toward integration. You cannot heal what you refuse to acknowledge. Spiritual awakening begins not when you transcend your darkness, but when you turn toward it with compassion and curiosity. True perception, on the other hand, feels calm, balanced, and discerning. It does not shout, accuse, or defend. It observes. It understands. It sees clearly without needing to be right. This is the difference between seeing through the eyes of the ego and seeing through the eyes of the soul. When you are outraged, you are projecting. When you are peaceful, you are perceiving. The awakened man knows this difference instinctively because he has learned to pause before reacting. He has learned to let the body speak its truth before the mind builds its story. This is the essence of Jung's spiritual wisdom. Wholeness does not come from denying the shadow, but from embracing it. The ego seeks purity by dividing itself, but the soul seeks unity by integrating all parts. When you withdraw your projections, you reclaim your power. The traits you once despised in others become mirrors of self-awareness, each one guiding you closer to inner freedom. Every emotion, every irritation, every judgment becomes a messenger leading you toward the truth. And in that truth, calm replaces tension, compassion replaces pride, and awareness replaces illusion. That is when the shadow no longer controls you. You walk beside it, knowing it was never your enemy, only the part of you that longed to be seen. Leave your like and subscribe to Spiritual Wisdom, and don't forget to turn on the notification bell so you never miss deep insights like this. Stay mindful, stay aware, and keep growing in your spiritual awakening. Comment below. I choose awareness over projection to affirm your commitment to self-mastery and inner peace. 5. Reclaiming the shadow. Active shadow reclamation. You don't eliminate projection. You reclaim it. This was Carl Jung's timeless teaching that the path to spiritual growth begins not in denial, but in conscious reclamation. When Jung guided Friedrich through the dark corridors of his mind, he didn't ask him to destroy the shadow, but to sit with it, to visualize it, and to speak to it as if it were a separate being. It was there, in that quiet and uneasy dialogue, that Friedrich finally saw what he had feared his whole life, that the darkness within him wasn't evil at all. It was power, waiting to be understood. The manipulation he despised, the ambition he hid, the envy he condemned, these weren't curses, but neutral forces that needed direction. When used unconsciously, they controlled him. When faced consciously, they became his tools for transformation. Through this process, Jung called active imagination, Friedrich began to form a relationship with the part of himself he had long rejected. He learned that spirituality is not about escaping what's dark, but learning to see the divine even within it. His ambition, once rooted in pride, became the fuel for mastery. His manipulative tendencies, once used for control, transformed into intuition and an ability to read energy and emotion. He began to realize that the shadow was not his enemy, but his greatest teacher, showing him where love and awareness had not yet reached. By naming these traits, owning them, and consciously choosing when to use them, Friedrich reclaimed his power and began walking as a whole being rather than a fractured soul. The integration of the shadow is the essence of real spirituality. It is not about wearing light to hide your darkness, but about merging both so that your soul becomes whole. It's easy to label parts of yourself as good or bad, but when you do, you divide your inner world. Jung taught that wholeness comes only when you can hold opposites without judgment, when you can see that the same fire that destroys can also illuminate. Friedrich's journey reminds us that spiritual growth is not born from suppressing emotion, but from understanding it. Every impulse, every flaw, every fear is a messenger of something deeper waiting to be seen. When you stop rejecting what you are and start conversing with it, your inner world becomes aligned. In the silence of that alignment, a new awareness emerges, one that no longer blames others for what it cannot face within. You stop projecting because you've reclaimed what was lost. You begin to see the same shadow in others with compassion rather than judgment. This is the moment your heart matures, when love extends even to your own darkness. And that is when real transformation begins. Not by pretending to be pure, but by becoming conscious. Because in the language of the soul, nothing within you is meant to be destroyed, only redeemed, rebalanced, and brought back into the light of awareness. 6. Transformation through integration. Through the practice of conscious reclamation, Friedrich began to awaken to the truth that transformation is not about denying what is dark within us, but about integrating it. In only 6 months, he managed to reduce his emotional projections by nearly 90%, and his life began to blossom in every direction. His relationships deepened, his career stabilized, and his emotional world softened into balance. What truly changed, however, was not his outer reality, but his inner alignment. The constant war between emotion and reason began to dissolve, giving rise to a quiet harmony that reflected a profound shift in consciousness. As Carl Jung said, one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. Friedrich discovered that by reclaiming what he once rejected, he could transform it into strength. The very traits he had feared, anger, pride, insecurity, became sources of awareness and creative energy once brought into the light of understanding. This is the essence of what Jung called shadow integration, a process that lies at the heart of spiritual wisdom. Every person carries a shadow, the part of the psyche that holds our denied emotions, fears, and impulses. When we repress or deny these parts, they do not disappear. Instead, they control us from behind the curtain, shaping our behavior and relationships without our awareness. But when we face them honestly and without judgment, they begin to lose their destructive power. The act of integration turns inner conflict into inner strength, chaos into clarity. Through daily self-reflection, journaling, and mindful awareness, Friedrich learned to pause each time he felt the urge to blame or criticize others. Instead of projecting his pain outward, he turned inward and asked himself, what part of me is trying to speak through this moment? Over time, this question became a doorway into peace, humility, and self-acceptance. Modern science now supports what Jung understood intuitively nearly a century ago. Neuroscientific studies reveal that the process of shadow integration strengthens the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain that governs emotional regulation, decision-making, and empathy. When we stop running from our emotions and instead learn to integrate them, we literally reshape our neural pathways. Reactivity decreases, self-awareness increases, and we develop a deeper resilience to life's challenges. This shows that spiritual awakening is not just an abstract idea. It is a biological transformation. The mind and body, once divided by conflict, begin to function in harmony, reflecting the unity of the soul that Jung believed was the goal of all true individuation. But the journey toward integration demands courage. It requires us to see the parts of ourselves we would rather hide: the jealousy, the resentment, the fear of inadequacy. Jung wrote, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves." The darkest sign in a person's mind is not their shadow itself, but their refusal to acknowledge it. Denial breeds projection, and projection breeds suffering. Yet the moment we take ownership of our darkness, we begin to reclaim our power. We no longer need to judge, control, or escape. We begin to live authentically, no longer fragmented but whole. Friedrich's transformation stands as living proof that facing the shadow with awareness can heal not only the psyche, but the entire human being. He learned that the true light of spiritual wisdom does not come from escaping darkness, but from embracing it. As emotion and reason aligned, his life became a reflection of balance rather than battle. Integration, as Jung revealed, is not merely a psychological process. It is a sacred act of remembering who we are beneath the masks and the fears. Through it, every wound becomes a teacher, every flaw a doorway, and every shadow a silent guide leading us back to the light of wholeness. 7. Identifying integrated verses, projecting people. People who have truly faced their own darkness speak differently, act differently, and live differently. You can sense it in the calm depth of their words and the quiet strength in their presence. When Carl Jung spoke of the shadow, he wasn't warning us about evil in others. He was asking us to confront the darkness within ourselves. The difference between someone who has integrated their shadow and someone who projects it can be felt long before it's understood. It's a silent energy that either invites peace or provokes chaos. The first sign lies in language. Integrated individuals speak with nuance, allowing for the gray spaces of life. They don't rush to label or condemn. They use language as a bridge, not a weapon. They say things like, "Perhaps, I can see it another way," or "I might be wrong," because they have learned that truth is layered, not absolute. Their speech reflects humility born from self-awareness. But those who project their shadow speak in absolutes: always, never, good, evil. Their tone divides the world into saints and sinners because they cannot bear to see both in themselves. To them, certainty is safety, and complexity is a threat. You can feel the rigidity in their words, as if every sentence is a shield protecting them from self-reflection. The second signal lies in how a person handles feedback. Integrated people stay open. They view feedback as an opportunity to evolve. When you challenge them, they pause, reflect, and often respond with curiosity. They might say, "I hadn't thought about it that way," or "Tell me more." They are not easily offended because they have already faced their own internal criticism. In spirituality and spiritual awakening, this openness is a sacred sign. It means the ego no longer rules the soul. But those who are still projecting react with defensiveness, irritation, or denial. Feedback feels like a personal attack because it threatens the illusion of perfection they have built around themselves. They deflect blame, twist your words, or turn the mirror back on you, accusing you of the very faults they refuse to see in themselves. Jung once said, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves." But the projector never reaches that understanding. They are too busy escaping their reflection. The third sign is how a person relates to uncertainty. Those who have integrated their shadow can live with ambiguity. They understand that life is fluid, that not knowing is a natural part of awakening. They can say, "I don't know yet," and feel no shame in that honesty. Their calmness in uncertainty shows emotional maturity and spiritual strength. They don't need to control every outcome because they trust that clarity unfolds in time. This is the heart of spiritual awakening, the courage to dwell in the unknown. Projectors, however, are deeply uncomfortable with not knowing. They crave immediate answers, absolute truths, and simple explanations. Their world must make sense instantly, even if it's built on delusion. They cling to their beliefs not because they are wise, but because they are terrified of uncertainty. When you are around integrated souls, you feel safe. Their energy doesn't demand, drain, or dominate, it soothes. You can be imperfect and still feel accepted. But when you're around projectors, you feel tense, judged, and uneasy, as though walking on emotional eggshells. Their presence drains your spirit because they are unconsciously at war with themselves. Integration, therefore, is not about moral purity, but inner harmony. It is the quiet acceptance of one's humanity, the light and the dark, the flaws and the wisdom. Those who embrace this wholeness radiate peace. Those who deny it radiate pain. The greatest mark of spirituality is not perfection, but integration, the courage to see yourself fully and to stop using others as mirrors for what you refuse to face within. 8. From curse to superpower, integrated perception. When Friedrich finally confronted the darkness within him, the curse that once haunted his mind transformed into something extraordinary, a superpower of perception. What used to feel like a painful sensitivity to manipulation and deceit became the foundation of his spiritual growth. He realized that the very traits he once despised in himself were not his enemies, but his teachers. Through this awakening, he discovered what Carl Jung called integrated perception, the ability to see clearly without distortion or projection. The moment he stopped blaming others and started observing his own motives, his vision became sharper, his intuition cleaner, and his spirit lighter. He no longer feared the darkness because he understood that seeing it was not a punishment, but a path toward wholeness. As he journeyed deeper, Friedrich saw that his shadow had always been a mirror, reflecting the parts of himself he had refused to acknowledge. The more he denied his own tendencies to control, the more he saw manipulation everywhere. But when he accepted those aspects with honesty and humility, the projections faded. He began to discern between real danger and imagined threats, between what was truly dark and what was merely misunderstood. This was the alchemy of the soul, transforming judgment into wisdom and fear into awareness. In that moment, his spirituality matured, not as an escape from pain, but as a deeper understanding of it. With time, Friedrich realized that sensitivity was never his weakness. It was his power waiting to be refined. What once overwhelmed him with anxiety now guided him with precision. He could sense dishonesty, not to condemn it, but to understand it. He began to see the hidden dynamics in people, the energy beneath their words, the unspoken motives shaping their choices. Yet instead of reacting defensively, he responded with calm observation. He no longer saw the world as good versus evil, but as a living reflection of the human psyche, light and shadow intertwined. His perception became his prayer, and his awareness became his protection. Carl Jung once said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. Friedrich lived this truth. By making his inner shadows conscious, he reclaimed the parts of his soul he had once abandoned. He no longer projected his inner chaos onto others, but learned to interpret life's patterns through the lens of spiritual wisdom. Integrated perception allowed him to walk through the world with both clarity and compassion, to recognize deceit without becoming bitter, to feel deeply without losing balance. His spirituality became a dance between discernment and love, where every emotion, even darkness, had something sacred to reveal. In the end, Friedrich's so-called curse was never a punishment. It was an initiation. His ability to see manipulation was not meant to destroy his peace, but to awaken his spirit. When he embraced this gift with humility, it turned into divine sight, a clear awareness that pierced through illusion. The lesson is timeless. When you stop rejecting your shadow, you stop living in fear. You begin to see truth as it is complex, multidimensional, alive. That is the essence of spiritual growth, to turn what once blinded you into the very light that guides your soul forward. And as we close today's reflection, remember that Jung's insight into the darkest corners of the mind wasn't meant to scare us. It was meant to set us free. When we face the shadow within, we stop projecting it onto others and start transforming it into light. That is where true growth begins. If this message has inspired you, don't forget to like this video, share it with someone who values deep self-awareness, and subscribe to Spiritual Wisdom. Make sure to turn on the notification bell so you won't miss our upcoming explorations into the mysteries of the human soul.